For so many of us who came from divorced families, we can't help but want at some level for our parents to resolve their problems and get back together. Now, this isn't true for everyone, right? Especially in extreme situations where the divorce happened because of abuse or violence, there definitely needed to be some sort of a split. But even if we know it isn't good for our parents to be together in that condition, we often can't help but just want our family to be whole. And we might even feel ashamed for that, especially if people led us to believe that the divorce is this good, happy thing. My guest today felt that desire for his parents and his family to be whole. And in this episode, he and I discussed that and more. Like how as a boy, he would cry himself asleep because of the pain from his family's breakdown, how anger, overeating, and lots of activities became his coping mechanisms, which thankfully he's outgrown. He shares how his parents' divorce has affected him differently in different stages of his life. And in this episode, he just walks us through those different stages. We discuss how much should parents tell their kids, divulge to their kids about the divorce. It's a tricky topic, tricky question to answer. And finally, he opens up about what he's done to heal and grow and how his life is better now. Stay with us. Welcome to the Restored Podcast, helping you heal and grow from the trauma of your parents' divorce, separation, or broken family so you can break that cycle. I'm your host, Joey Panarelli. This is episode 124. We're so happy to hear so many of you have found the podcast helpful and even healing. We've heard lots of great feedback. One woman said this: I found Restored a couple of months ago, and it's given me the clarity and courage to actually begin to address the unprocessed trauma of my parents' divorce. Thank you for this ministry. Again, we're so happy to hear it's been helpful and even healing. We do it for you. Today's episode is sponsored by Blackstone Films. In a recent survey by Adobe, 98% of Gen Z and 91% of millennials said video is their top content choice. And that's not really surprising, but if you run a business or a ministry, are you taking advantage of that? Are you using video content, especially in your marketing? If you're like most of us, you know you need to create video content, but there's just so many barriers to actually doing it. You don't know how to do it. You don't have the time to learn it. You don't know who to hire, who's trustworthy. And it kind of leaves you feeling overwhelmed to the point where you just go back to what you know, to what's comfortable. But that's where Blackstone Films can help you. They're a Catholic film and video production company that creates films that make you feel. They can create things like trailers, promo videos and commercials, social media videos, documentaries, fundraising videos, and courses. We actually produced 2 video courses with them. We had an excellent experience. So whatever you need, Blackstone is obsessed about helping you not just create video content, but a clear win, a clear result for your business or your ministry, such as, fundraising for your ministry, selling a course, getting leads for your business, getting students to sign up for your school, promoting your event, and so much more. Blackstone has reached millions of people around the globe with their videos, and they can help you too. And so to view their past projects and the services that they offer, just go to their website, blackstonefilms.co, not .com. Again, blackstonefilms.co, or just click on the link in the show notes. My guest today is Ethan. Like so many of us, he is a child of divorced parents. His hope for you listening is that you know that there is hope and beauty that can rise from the ashes. He graduated from Lancaster Bible College with a degree in biblical studies and currently lives in Nashville, Tennessee, where he performs as a touring drummer. His goal in life is to love God and others, and to be loved by God and others, and to make the world a better place. He loves meeting new people and hearing their stories. Without waiting any longer, here's our chat. Ethan, so good to have you on the show, man.
Thanks, Joey. I'm really happy to be here.
I'm excited to dive into your story. And as we usually do, we'll just go head first into it. How old were you when your parents separated and divorced?
Yeah, absolutely. So when my parents separated, I was about 8 years old. I was in 3rd grade. And so they separated then. And I forget when, at some point later, they divorced. But I mean, effectively, it felt like they kind of divorced when I was that old.
No, it totally makes sense. And it is there's kind of a gray area there. I think often one or the other kind of leaves more of an impact depending on the story. So that totally makes sense. To whatever degree you're comfortable sharing, what happened, what led up to it, what happened when it all went down?
Yeah. So I'm totally happy to share. And just as a disclaimer to the audience, I definitely will be talking about some really difficult and hard things, obviously, in my story. But I also just want to say that I'm going to talk about a lot of things that have brought me joy and some peace from this. So we're going to get to the bottom and we're going to get to the top. So just hang on for the ride here.
Good.
But yeah, so when my parents separated, I remember where we were. We all had gathered in the dining room table, and mom and dad were like, "Hey, we need to tell you something. We're getting separated." And so immediately, like, we all kind of, I ran away out of the room crying, and immediately, like, all of my siblings and I were sitting upstairs, and my first thought was, we have to get them back together. We have to get them back together. And I just, didn't realize at the time that that's not something you can do as an 8-year-old. And so, yeah, that was a really pivotal moment in my life. But later that day, I just went over to a friend's house, just because I think that was my gut reaction, was to go be with other people. So yeah, that's what it looked like when it started.
Okay, no, that makes so much sense. And that, man, what a like kind of pure and innocent desire of like, man, I want my family to be whole. I want my parents to kind of work through this. And I think the more people I've talked to, who come from broken families, like even if they see, especially in some extreme situations, the value of like, okay, it was dangerous or there was abuse or whatever, there had to be some sort of a split. There is always, I think, that desire of like, man, wouldn't it be so good if my parents could just work through this stuff and we can have like a whole family. And I remember with my siblings, and I don't even know what happened, but there was one night where things were kind of tense at home. This was like, kind of years after the divorce, and there was some arguing and some like, even crying, I think. And I remember someone just saying like, man, all I've really wanted was just like for our family to be whole. And
Mm,
for some reason that just like struck a nerve in me. And I was like, like that's what I want too. So I think that's a desire so many of us feel.
yeah.
I wanted to go deeper into your story too. I'm curious, in the months and years that followed and everything leading up to, how did that all affect you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I feel like there's so many different ways to tackle that because, I'm sure there's, how it affected me in elementary school, middle school, high school, college, and beyond. Yeah, just, I mean, some immediate ways I think that it affected me. I'll kind of start there and then go forward a little bit. So when I was in elementary school, what that looked like for me was I had always been relatively carefree. Like I'd never really gone through anything that hard in life up to that point. And so crying myself to sleep became just like a very frequent, like very normal thing, even though it wasn't normal. I started experiencing some bullying at school, just different things like that. Would frequently like eat a lot of seconds to just kind of like try to mask my feelings and like feel a little bit better as a little kid. So that's how it affected me in the short term. And then once I got to middle school, really we kind of hit a moment where I realized that, hey, something that helps me not feel bad is doing things and just really being involved in a lot of activities. And so, I mean, anything that I could possibly do, I did. Boy Scouts, youth groups, sports, band, instruments, was just doing all of it. And so that's kind of how it affected me more so in elementary and middle school. And then I think at home, things changed too, because obviously you're missing seeing the way we had our schedule was we'd see our dad every other weekend. So, definitely missed seeing him as much, and things were just different too. Like at my mom's house where we spent, the school weeks, just there's kind of that lack of, oh, like, I guess we all have to do some more chores now. And there's, more conflict just between siblings and stuff. So, it was something we were all trying to figure out together. And so I think it definitely got more difficult, but those are some of the immediate impacts.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, man, what a difficult thing for a kid to go through. Like looking back, we can like summarize that kind of easily, effortlessly almost. But my goodness, when you're in the midst of it, that is heavy stuff.
Yeah, and just I think one of the biggest moments that stands out for me. So I really, did have a tough time through like the rest of elementary school, and it kind of came to a head when I was in sixth grade, and I, I'd frequently been crying myself to sleep, and there was this one night where I was just overwhelmed with tears, and for me personally, like I at that point did believe in God and had that relationship with Him, and so for me it was on one hand like I've been raised to believe that God is good and all of this stuff. But on the other hand, my whole world has fallen apart. And so here I am at 8 years old, like trying to reconcile these two things, like, all right, what's really true? And so at that point in my life, most nights I would just go to bed and I'd pray, like, God, just, get my parents back together, just help me out. Like, if you're real, just show up. And so, for 4 years, for three years, I didn't hear anything, like not a word. It just felt like I was calling somebody on the phone and nobody was answering the other end. And then I had this really, really interesting, like very special moment in my life where I was on my bed one night in sixth grade, and I was just crying, like really distraught. And unlike any other time in my life, I just felt the presence of God come down on me. And he said, Ethan, I have always been here for you. Ethan, I always will be here for you. And I have a plan for your life. And that was the moment that changed everything for me, because beyond a shadow of a doubt, I knew, I was like, all right, like God is real, and that's who I'm, going to follow and give my life to. And so I know that that's not everybody's story. And, a lot of Christians may not have even had a moment like that. But the reason I share that is that was just a really big personal turning point for me of, okay, like the worst thing possible could have happened to me did happen. And still somehow, the Lord has showed up and has brought like this beautiful moment out of tragedy.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. And I can totally relate. My story was a little bit different. It was really through meeting friends of mine who were just really like joyful people. And I was miserable. Like I was so miserable. I was, hooked on porn, and I was just struggling in a lot of different ways with like emotions, like anger and loneliness, depression, anxiety, like all those things. And I meet these people who are just like, they're peaceful, they're joyful, like they're happy people. They're not fake, they're real too. And I was like, what in the world do you have? Like whatever that is, like I want it. And so that's really what led me to kind of go deeper with faith and build a relationship with God. But yeah, no, I love hearing that story. And that's like, what a grace, what a gift to like have that moment.
Yeah. So that really, that gave me such a strong foundation, I think, because we all know that middle school can be full of ups and downs. But for
Yeah.
me, my mom said this thing that I've always thought was really beautiful. She said, feeling grief is like one end of the pendulum. And the further that you've swung on that side, the further you can really feel joy on the other side. And I
Mm.
really have seen that ring true in my life. Like if I could change the divorce, obviously I would. But, I see that because I've had to deal with such grief at such a young age, like that really has just given me just an appreciation for the beauty of the things in ordinary moments. Like if I'm outside and we're all loading a moving truck, maybe other people will be like, oh, this, like, I'm tired. This is hot. This is horrible. And I'm like, guys, the sun is shining. Like it's 60 degrees. Like this is amazing. And so I just think that's a really great thing, because life is really, really difficult, like excruciating at times, but it also really does have this capacity just to be beautiful. And so I see that as, one of the good things that came out of that experience.
100%. One of the things I've noticed with people like us too is kind of based on that contrast principle that you just articulated so well. We have like more capacity for empathy, I've noticed. And I would bet this is true for most people who've been through any sort of trauma, because I see divorce and family falling apart as a trauma. And that's what the studies say too, and the stories and all that, as you know. But yeah, it seems like it kind of opens a part of your heart that maybe wouldn't have otherwise been open for other people who are also suffering.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the last thing I want to say, because I'm trying to keep, our audience in mind here of people who have also, like, their parents have gone through divorce. Our situation was a little bit unique, just in the sense that we didn't know why our parents got divorced, and they never told us. So, I'm very, very grateful that they never brought us in the middle of anything. There was never any like shouting or screaming matches that we witnessed, but there was just kind of this really weird void. So I know that everybody's story is unique, but I just kind of wanted to provide that little context there.
Yeah, that's helpful. Let's stay there for a second. What's your advice to a parent listening right now? Like they're going through a divorce, and maybe they were divorced, and maybe they're not sure how much they should share with their kids. I'm curious, kind of your opinion on, what should they say? Easy question.
Mm. Yeah, if you're a parent going through that, I just want to let you know that as a child of a situation like that, my heart goes out to you, and I know that I'm sure there's a lot of complex factors that have led to, your present circumstances. And so I think when you're talking with kids, it's totally different ballgame when you're talking with elementary school kids versus somebody in middle school versus somebody in high school. But I think, the best thing you can do, and I feel like the best thing my parents did was they just, like, individually, they didn't have the husband wife thing figured out, but the parent thing, like, they had that down. Their focus was always, hey, how can we both be really present and involved and love and listen to our kids through this process? And so, yeah, I think when it comes to the details of the divorce, like that's not something that they need to know at a young age. When they're older, it definitely is important to unpack that, I think, at some point. But yeah, I think it's, when if you're focusing on really being a great parent and just keeping conflict to a minimum, like that really does have positive dividends for your kids and really does help them through that process.
Good advice. And I would echo what you said. And I kind of go to the other end of the spectrum too. I've seen situations where parents overshare, and I know you were alluding to this too, and it really causes a lot of damage. That whether they're at war with each other
Hmm.
and they're trying to, whether it's conscious or not, they're trying to maybe put down the other spouse or make them look bad. So they kind of win the kid to their side. Or, it's just like they feel like the kids deserve to know. I think there is a possibility of oversharing to where it becomes like this big burden that the children then carry around. I've seen that in many situations. And so I think there is a middle ground. I think on one end, leaving, not saying anything, is probably super confusing to a kid because, like, why in the
Hmm.
world is this happening? On the other hand, sharing too much can be kind of damaging too. So I think your advice on making it kind of age appropriate and not needing to like divulge all the sins and secrets about kind of what went down, I think is really good. And I've heard people say, when you're talking to your kids about sex too, like it's kind of similar. Like you want to give them just enough information to kind of satisfy their curiosity, but not more. And then when they get older and they have more questions and they need to know more information, you give them kind of more. So you're kind of like unveiling, kind of peeling back the layers a little bit of a time. And I think that's really good advice when it comes to this whole divorce topic as well. I'm sure there's a lot more we can say there, but I'm curious to kind of keep going through the different chapters of your story. And I love that you broke it down that way because I think it's so true that the struggles, the trauma, like kind of surfaces, comes out in different ways as we kind of progress through life. So yeah, tell us more.
Yeah. So I'll just kind of skip ahead onto high school. Or I guess, yeah, middle school and high school. So I think one thing, and again, you learn a lot. Wow. You really do learn so much at different stages because I can look back now at 27 years old on middle school and high school and college and say, oh, that's when this was happening, or that's when I was experiencing that. But at the time, I didn't have language for that. I didn't know what that was. I just kind of knew how I felt. So, a lot of times, the way that I felt during that season of my life was that all of my feelings were just wrapped up together, just like, and I couldn't even name them. There was anger in there was depression in there was sadness, and it just felt like this swirling tornado that I could not quell, just this storm inside me. And so it was really difficult for me to be alone. It was really difficult for me to do anything. Like, I remember, even up into high school, like if everybody was out of the house and I was just had a day off school or something, like if I was at the home alone, like it would leave me in tears, like inevitably, just because I could physically not stand like being alone with my emotions. And so, the way I coped with that was by doing a lot of activities, but really spending a lot of time with friends. I found that, consistently the thing that always helped me feel better was just having like other people I could be around, just to joke around and do fun stuff with, but also on occasion just really be honest about how I was feeling. And that's one thing I'm super proud of that, I was able to do and that I was able to have friends like that. And so I think at any age, if you're older than me or younger than me, like that's always just a really great thing is to just have, you don't need a lot of people, but if you just have a couple people who you really, really trust, just to spend time with them and to share what's really going on. And then I think the other biggest thing for me, because of that, it just felt like there was never any peace inside. But for whatever reason, I had originally started playing drums as a kid, and I said, Mom, I want to play trumpet. And she said, No, you need to learn rhythm first. And so that's actually like why I'm still a drummer today, which is very funny. But I remember the first time like I sat behind a drum set, it was electric. It was so much fun. And then I got a drum set for my birthday in seventh grade and set it up in the basement. And I would pop in the Foo Fighters' Greatest Hits, that is a great record. And when I would play along to that, I mean, Joey, it just felt like everything in my world was right. It just felt like all of my spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical chaos just like quieted down. And it felt like all of that came together just for like this really beautiful, beautiful piece. And so honestly, like I think that was the first time in my life where I just really was like I feel okay. And that was really significant for me, and as an older adult, I can be like, oh yeah, well, you're physically moving your body, and I can like try to explain all this stuff, but just at a very like human instinctual level, like that was just such a beautiful gift that I was able to receive. And honestly, like that, aside from my faith and my friends and my family, like that has been the biggest influence in my life that has really helped me just make sense of it all. Cause, I think we all need something like that. And, whether that's a sport, whether that's art, whether that's, insert your passion here. Like that space is really sacred. And I think it's a good thing to have. Because when you can feel okay, or you can feel, I guess, normal. Wow, that's not the right word I'm looking for. When you can get to a baseline level of like peace, I think that's a really good thing because then you're able to bring that into other spaces in your life and offer that to other people.
So good. No, I love all of that. And what I hear you saying too is I've heard some psychologists talk about like our emotions on a scale, like our basic emotions on a scale, where you have like hyper arousal and hypoarousal. And the way it was explained to me was, we're kind of meant to be at, if you think of a scale of 1 to 10, at the bottom of that scale is called hypoarousal, where you're totally depressed, like kind of lifeless. At the top of the scale is called hyperarousal. That's where you're completely anxious, like you're feeling terror essentially. And we'll kind of go up and down that scale throughout our life. But we want to be like in the 5 or 6 range where we have peace, but we maybe a little bit of an excitement, like a healthy stress, or, a little bit of like a, pop in our step sort of thing. And that sounds like that's what you experienced. You were kind of like up and down on that scale. And then finally there was something that kind of helped you stay in that equilibrium, which makes so much sense. And I had a similar experience too, kind of like you were saying, when I was surrounding myself with like these other friends who were just living like really happy, healthy lives compared with like the sports buddies who I was hanging around with who just weren't. There was just something about that was contagious to me. And I was like, okay, now, I certainly didn't earn or get to like emotional mastery overnight by any means. Like it was still messy for me. But in time, I noticed myself kind of leveling out and better able to, kind of regulate. As I know it's kind of a psych term, but it's like basically how do you go
Yeah.
from being up or down on that scale to getting back to the middle as quickly as you can. And so that's what I hear you saying. Anything you would add to that?
Yeah, I think that's a great segue because on the scale of kind of hypoarousal versus hyperarousal, honestly, I lived probably most of my life at like a 7 or 8, like the whole way through like
Dang.
high school and college, just flying, just doing as much as I could, just like, and some of that was really good, just like beautiful ambitions to like want to just really make the most of life. But there definitely was also a dynamic of trying to kind of outrun the pain. And I want to be clear that like that's something that, I still struggle with today and like, was very prevalent in my life, probably right up until about COVID and even after that. But the first time I realized it and became conscious of it, I was working at this summer camp for the second year in a row, and I didn't have time. I only could work there for 1 week. And I was so excited. And when I went back, I was just exhausted the whole week. Like I was just tired. It wasn't the same. And I remember one of these camp counselors sharing a story from when they were a kid about like wanting to run away. And my first thought was like, that sounds pretty nice. Like no stress, no responsibilities. And I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, man, I need to rest. And in that moment, I became consciously aware as like going into my junior year of high school, like, oh, I'm trying to outrun this thing. Like I'm trying to outrun the pain that I feel. And that was the first time that I really became aware of it. And so, still obviously was going a mile a minute, but like tried to like take a couple things off that I like was over committed to. I think that's a word that accurately described my life a lot during that time. And so, yeah, I kind of became aware of that then. And then I'm sure there's other stuff in high school that I'm forgetting, but really that kind of
Yeah.
followed me into college. I went to a Bible college, which was a really good experience for me. And then my sophomore year, we took this class called Student and Family Counseling, which is basically, you're trying to learn the basics of how to help people who are going through tough things. And so the first assignment was write about the toughest thing that you've ever been through. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's easy. I've already worked through that. I'm past that. This is great. And then I wrote about my parents' divorce and realized, in fact, I was not past it. And I had a lot to work through there. And so for anybody who's in that college space, I think the biggest thing I realized was that for me personally, the way we all process negative emotion differently, but instead of me becoming angry and directing that outwards at my parents or at other people, my default mode was to always turn that inward of like, oh, what's wrong with me? Or why do I feel this way? And so it kind of manifested as depression for me a lot growing up. So in college, I realized, oh no, like there's actually a lot of anger here. And so I really, for the first time, began to look that in the face and like, how do I process? How do I express this, to my parents? And that led to some pretty raw moments for me. And so, I want to be honest and say to the people that are struggling in that time of life that it's okay. Like, I always tell people life after high school, like, it will be worse than you could ever imagine, but it will also be like way better than you could ever imagine. And there was nights where, I'd be screaming in my car, just God and just praying and just so angry, and then also there would be these moments of, healing and just connection with others. And so I want to be honest with that like, there is layers to this thing. And I know psychologists and therapists will tell you that you have to kind of reprocess it at each age. But that was certainly my experience in that college era.
Wow. No, that's deep and really good, I think, for anyone, like you said, in that stage of life right now. And I can totally relate to the anger. I can relate to entering new chapters in life and different brokenness in me, like surfacing again, different parts of me kind of coming out that, maybe were somewhat dormant in the past. And I remember, yeah, similar to you, like being in college. And I remember the girl I was dating at the time, great girl. I just had this experience of just feeling like super broken. That was like the best language I could put to it. Like I felt like kind of fragmented.
Mhm.
Like, yeah. So, some form of depression, I guess, and just overall just feeling, yeah, broken. And, I knew I wasn't supposed to like take it to her. And so eventually, like, similar to what you were describing, I was able to get therapy on campus, and that was helpful, and try to just make sense of the emotions and what I had been through in the past, and not just like what I had been through in the past, but how it was affecting me today. And that's one thing I think a lot of us overlook is we think that the past is like in the past, but sometimes, as one of my guests said, the past lives in the present. And that's really like one of the earmarks, one of the signs of trauma is that we're carrying that stuff with us. Like our brains almost can't differentiate often that what had happened in the past wasn't kind of brought to closure. And therefore we are living our life as if we're in the midst of it right now. And that's a really difficult thing to carry with you.
Yeah, I think a therapist or somebody said to me one time that you're every age that you've ever been. And I was like, oh man, because you kind of,
Wow.
there's those parts of you that you still, feel those things, and you can tend, if you haven't resolved them, to process things like that. And so, while I started that work in college, I just did it for one semester. I kind of just dipped my toes in and didn't really, fully dive in, which was fine. Like maybe I just wasn't ready at that point. And so after college, I moved down to Atlanta, Georgia, and was doing a new job, was doing a ton of music stuff, was like going to a new church, and kind of in a lot of the same way, like really lived in that over functioning mentality, but just in a new place, on an even bigger capacity, and spread even more thin. And it wasn't really until COVID hit that it was the week before COVID. I went into a therapist's office because there was somebody that I was making no money my first year out of college. And they had like a therapist who would meet with you for a discounted rate because they've finished all their schooling, but like they're getting their hours to get licensed. And so I could actually afford it, which was awesome. And I got super blessed to actually be paired with like one of the best therapists of all time. And I'm very, very grateful for them. And yeah, I just walked in and I was like, I've had one of the best years of my life. Like I've overcome a lot of challenges by moving to this new city, but something's off. Like I know that something's off deep inside me, and I just can't figure out why. And then that really unlocked a process. And because of COVID and the slowdown, I just had this time in my life to actually do the work and really dig in. And so honestly, yeah, one of the biggest things that has helped me in my journey is therapy. So I did that for 3.5 years,
Wow.
and I could probably write a whole book on everything that I've learned. But it really does take 6 to 9 months of doing therapy on a weekly or bi-weekly basis to really start seeing and understanding some of the lessons that you've learned. And I think this analogy might help some people who are, if you're weary of therapy, like I totally get it. There's a lot of people who are. So I ran track in high school, and not because I wanted to. It's just because we didn't have a baseball team one year, and I was like, oh, what the heck, got to do something. And so the first day of practice, our coach was like, you don't know how to run. And I was like, what are you talking about? I've been running my whole life. Who do you think you are? And then he proceeded to break down the mechanics of running, how, in order to have the fastest time, you really have to make sure you're lifting your knee, fully extending your leg, like driving through, like kicking your feet. And then I realized, oh, I was very wrong. There is a right way and a wrong way to run. And the way I try to explain therapy to people is, you might say, of course I know how to feel my feelings. Like I've been me my whole life. But until somebody really breaks it down for you and says, hey, this is how you can sit with a negative emotion, and this is how you can name it and process it and give it space to be felt, like you just don't know how to do that. And so for me, over a very long period of time, like this was not an overnight thing, slowly, week by week, day by day, I learned what it was to find like one little feeling or one little negative thing that I could kind of pull out of that tornado and just sit with, and like take the 90 seconds or so to really feel that emotion and then start to process it. And it was just awesome, man. Like, I think for the first time in my life, I was really able to start taking some of those bigger chunks and move things out of this like bucket of unawareness, just all this stuff I was struggling with that I didn't even know about. I moved it into the awareness of like, okay, this maybe is why I'm feeling this way and why I'm having these issues. And then slowly, as I was ready, at a much slower pace than I wanted to, because I was like, come on, why aren't we done with this yet? Just bit by bit, I was really able to process those and get to a point where I really started to feel, emotionally healthy. And I'd say, like, kind of where I was at the end of that, fully transparent, like, you will still have days where you're depressed. You will still have a lot of ordinary days and you'll still have some really good days. But I think I'm at a point now where when I'm healthy, I can really process my emotions in the moment or like day by day. And so instead of just all of this backlog of feelings continuing to pile up and just kind of overwhelm me all at once, like a tidal wave crashing down, I can kind of take it like smaller wave by smaller wave, which is a much better way to live. And probably one of the biggest concepts I took away from therapy was, the window of tolerance, where they talk about, trying to like regulate yourself, where, sometimes like you just have this much energy to be able to feel things. And so you want to stay inside that zone, and, you can let negative stuff into the stuff to the degree that you can handle it. And then if you can't handle it, you just take a step back and be like, hey, that's not where I'm at today. But I think overall therapy has helped me increase my window of tolerance and just stay a little bit more regulated on a day-to-day basis.
No, and that's like a transformation in itself, from maybe being controlled by your emotions, or maybe your emotions drive you to act in a certain way that's like harmful to you, to then being able to say, no, my emotions are not the boss. Like, I'm in control, but I'm not going to disregard them. I'm going to give them the space that they need. There's a reason they're there. They deserve some validation, some acknowledgement. But again, they're not going to be the boss of me. They're not going to control me. So what a good and like healthy way to process it all. And that's so fascinating. You mentioned like unawareness to awareness, because we've noticed this trend in the interviews we've done on this podcast, that a lot of people kind of have that shift kind of on a meta, like macro level, when they're looking at kind of the brokenness in their life, that they might, like you and I experience, understand that, man, yeah, I'm dealing with all these emotional problems like anxiety, depression, loneliness. I maybe am acting out, struggling with this, whatever, anger, reacting on anger, or looking at porn or whatever other unhealthy behavior. But they so often don't have like a full awareness around it, or they don't trace it back to its origin. Like, how did this start? Where did this come from? What's the root of it? Not just like the symptom. And then when they go through that period of moving from like unawareness to awareness, there's like this kind of eye-opening, this aha moment, like some people say, where it's like, okay, this is making more sense. Like, I can connect the dots. I can understand kind of why, I do this, why I do that. But then they need tools, kind of like you were saying, to be able to deal with it all. And that sounds like what therapy gave you, which is so, so beautiful. And I think at that point, you're able to then kind of move into this final stage of like, okay, so again, you're going from unawareness to awareness. Then from the awareness, you kind of understand things, and you need to go into this like processing or healing stage. And then it seems like the final stage there is like some form of freedom, not perfection, not like utopia. That's not real, but some form of like freedom where it's not controlling you anymore. So you somewhat described that model, which is really interesting. And again, it's not something we made up. It was just like something that popped up at us after doing like dozens of these stories. So, which I thought was super, super interesting. One last point on that, and I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts on this, is Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist, I think it was, not endorsing everything he said, but he had this really interesting quote that he said, until, kind of talking about awareness and unawareness, he said, until you make like the subconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. And so I think there is truly this like kind of unconscious part of us that's really controlling our behavior. And that until we go through the process that you described of like taking it out of the unawareness into the awareness, from the subconscious into the conscious, that's when a lot of freedom can be found.
Yeah, yeah. And that certainly is a process, because when you're a kid, it's, I feel bad. I always feel bad. I want to stop feeling bad. What makes me stop feeling bad? Insert anything that makes you stop feeling bad, whether it's good or a bad habit. So, yeah, and those things that you're unaware of, those can carry on into your early 20s. And if that's you, or if you're like way older than that, like, dude, don't feel bad for that for a second. Like, I want you to celebrate the fact that you may be for the first time coming aware of, hey, there are some things weighing me down that maybe I don't even know about. Because I think the biggest thing is really celebrating those little steps, because it's truly not about arriving to a place of like, happiness or all of these things. It's just every single day, you really got to celebrate those moments where you gain a little bit of healing in one area or a little bit of perspective in another. Yeah. And I just think everything you said with that quote is so true. Yeah. Because the things that we don't know do still affect us, whether we're aware of them or not. But even moving those things into your awareness, like that's great. And if you don't have the ability to like figure all that out today, that's okay. And the second thing that was coming to me there, so that's, I think, really where I started. Like somewhere near the end of my therapy, we kind of dived into like negative core beliefs. And I really became aware of some of those for the first time, like things that I subconsciously believed about myself that were really affecting the way that I lived. And to even just be able to name those was like, oh my gosh, sometimes I think for me, like I'm not going to remember all of them, but like I think one of the biggest ones was like, I have to do this all by myself, or, like it's all up to me. And, that's such an American thing that we celebrate of, yeah, go get them, move to a new city, start a new job, find a band, like, look at you go, pick yourself up by your own bootstraps. But that's just not how the world works. And there is some good virtue, to being somebody who's courageous and willing to try new things. But I want to be transparent and just say that there's also a really shadow side to that of just believing that it's all up to you, and that if you, don't figure it out, like your life is going to be a waste or it's all going to go wrong. And so that's definitely something that once I heard that, I was like, oh my gosh, I could look back over all of my life and say like, yeah, I was just really driven by this fear and just this need to kind of, move forward at all costs. And so, yeah, and I think towards the end of my therapy journey, I had done a lot of good work. I was one of my biggest dreams, I don't think I mentioned it yet, was always to be a touring drummer. That was just this big like thing I wanted to do. And I had finally gotten a chance to do it. I had toured all these states and I was just like, circumstantially was on top of the world. But right after I got back from that, I remember sitting in my therapist's office and just telling her, it feels like if there's a canyon, right? It feels like somebody put 3 steps on one end of the canyon and said, all right, go jump to the other side. It felt like it felt like I had built these steps and I was running as fast as I could and jumping and just could not like overcome, these negative feelings. And I really, just hit this moment of kind of hopelessness. And I share that just to be honest that, like it's not like this super linear thing where you're just going to feel, totally great at the end. And it's like, hooray, it's truly like to the left, to the right, back, forward, up, down. And that was a real moment that I experienced. But on the flip side of that, there's also some other really beautiful moments of just ordinary things. Like in that year, I had a chance to like go and tour and play drums, which you would have thought, oh, the best day you spent that year was traveling to this really cool place to play this awesome show. And actually, my favorite day that year was getting to go home with my family, go pick apples at an apple orchard, and sit on the couch and just watch some football, And so I want to share that because I think, it's easy in our society to believe that pursuing your dreams and building your best life is the path to healing and wholeness. And I think what's beautiful is that, the things that can really help give us a meaningful, purposeful, whole life are a lot of the things that are just available to all of us. And I think that's so beautiful. Things like breathing, things like taking a walk outside, things about just like sharing a meal or a cup of coffee with a friend. We don't need to master ourselves or become like the best in the world at something to be okay. And I think there's such a beauty in that. And so I know that's probably not everybody's default response to, the things they've gone through, but I'm sure that there's somebody out there who, just is kind of that was their response was, oh, I have to do everything. And so to that person, I just want to take a moment to say that you can rest, that you're worthy of that rest. And there is a peace and there's a hope available to you, and that you don't have to strive to find your worthiness. Your worthiness and value has already been bestowed upon you because of who you are. And there are people who can celebrate that and really love you and lift you up for who you are, where you are.
Beautiful. And I think you'd find, at least what I've learned, is that there's so many of us actually who do struggle with what you said of kind of this fierce independence and feeling like, man, it's all on our shoulders. And if we falter at all, we're going to, it's going to have serious consequences. So that's freeing. And thank you for saying that. There's so much more in your story I want to get into, but I do want to shift to relationships. So I'm curious, kind of, yeah, how did you see your parents' divorce, everything that happened in your family affect your relationships, especially your dating relationships?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, I had one serious relationship. So my senior year of high school, I dated a girl I was friends with, and we dated for 9 months and just had a really great relationship, you know. And then kind of at the end of high school, I just realized that, you know, I was going on to college and different things. And so I was the one who actually broke up with her. And I felt horrible about that. I
Mm.
felt devastated, you know, because it wasn't like there was anything wrong with her. I just knew that I wasn't ready to get married because I was not trying to get married at 18, 19, or 20. And based off of what I had been taught, you know, that was kind of the purpose of dating, was like just to get married. And so that really wrecked me. And I think, you know, kind of an unconscious agreement that I made with myself was, well, I'm not going to date anybody until the next person I date is the person I'm going to marry, which is a dumb agreement to make with yourself. But I think that I was just so hurt by that, and I didn't want to cause that pain to somebody else, you know, that was kind of unconsciously what was going on for me. And so when I got to college, you know, I had tons of opportunities, you know, to like, I was just around so many great people, and I definitely could have, you know, gone on dates. But I think half jokingly, half serious, I was like, well, I don't want to get married. I don't want to get married young. You know, I gotta play drums in a band. And that was kind of my cop out, funny response. But you know, by the time I was 21 in my third year of college, I was like, oh man, this is a really deep desire that I have. And so, to be honest, like I've gone, you know, on a lot of dates, but I haven't really been in a serious relationship since that time, which, so I'm definitely still working through that. And I feel like I'm just now kind of getting to a point where I'm ready to jump into, I guess, kind of that. And so I think that is probably one of the negative ways that, I don't know, I guess like the divorce, but also like, you know, I'm sure that has to do with me personally. But like, I think one of my regrets is not having been more willing to do that sooner, because I think I let fear kind of have a little bit more control there than it needed to. So that's the honest version.
Yeah, no, thanks for the honest version. That's what I love to hear. And yeah, man, fear held me back so long and so much in my relationships. And gosh, I held off from dating for a while because I was just really afraid, if I'm honest. Maybe I would have said it was something different, but I was just like, I felt kind of clueless and incompetent when it came to love, relationships, dating. Like I thought in marriage, and I thought like other people knew what they were doing, and I just did not. And it just brought a lot of anxiety into my life, a lot of fear. So anyway, I can really relate. And the whole breakup component too, I think they're harder for people like us. Not to say that breakups don't suck whenever you go through them, but yeah, I've seen what I've seen is like it can almost feel like a mini divorce. And obviously it's not. A breakup's actually a good thing in many ways, because it's like, well, I've decided that I'm not going to spend the rest of my life with this person, but it's really painful to go through. And so, yeah, I've seen that. I know I've even felt that too. It's like, if I were to break up with this person, it's like I'm abandoning them. And I just like have such a strong instinct in me to never abandon anyone because of what I went through. And that could cause some damage, especially if it's a relationship or a time in your life when, you know, it's not going to work out like you described. So I think, yeah, there's a lot to navigate there when it comes to relationships and breakups.
Yeah. And again, you know, that's not something that you realize in the moment, because in the moment, it's like, I know this isn't a divorce. I know this is just a breakup. But I think your body feels like it's a divorce. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, but last time it wasn't my fault, but this time it is my fault. And I think that's the subconscious thing. And that's why, you know, it can be so powerful. And so, yeah, I just don't think I was even aware of all that. But then, ironically, recently, me and that girlfriend connected a couple years ago, just caught up randomly on the phone, just totally platonic, just as friends.
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh, she's fine. I'm fine. Like, you know, I'm not a bad person. And I was like, I realized in that moment, I was like, I have been carrying this shame for years. And I had like no reason to be carrying that, you know? And so, yeah.
No, that's beautiful. Similar with me, like the girls I dated, awesome girls. Didn't work out for some reason, whatever reason. And now they're doing great. They seem like they're doing great in life, and I'm super happy for them. And so anyway, I can totally relate with you. And I think there's a lot of peace that can come from that, because I think it is natural when you love someone to feel a level of responsibility toward them. Like you want the best for them. And that's a good thing. And I don't think like just because you break up with them, it's like automatically stopping, as if you can cut out a part of your heart and never feel anything. like you care deeply for them. And so you want the best for them. So I totally can see the different layers to what you're saying there. So thanks for sharing all that. And I'm sure there's so much more we could say on the relationship topic. I did want to shift over to when it comes to healing. You already mentioned a ton of things that have helped you heal. I'm curious if there's anything else maybe that we haven't talked about so far that was really instrumental in helping you to heal and to cope with everything you've been through.
Yeah, I think just to get really practical, to kind of like the up to date. So when I was kind of winding down therapy and was still, feeling depressed and just kind of having some of those thoughts, I think one thing that I decided to do is just to kind of get back to some habits that I had that, really helped me feel good at a different point in my life. And so for me, and again, this is not for everybody, but just what I decided to do for a 3-month time period was like, all right, I'm going to cut out coffee, I'm going to cut out drinking. And kind of, I started running again, which was something that I had done very frequently in high school because, I did soccer and track. But after that was just always very sporadic. And then, actually ended up training for a longer race that I ran with my brother. And I think just having that was, something good because I really think when it comes to the healing thing, like I think physical movement and exercise has so much more to offer us than we're even aware of. And, that was just so beneficial for me. So to anybody who is feeling stuck, like, if that is within your power to take a 10-minute walk or a 15-minute walk, just start there, like even when I was working a job that was crazy hours, that was super difficult, like way over the top, I would make time to just do push-ups once a day with all my buddies in the office. And like, little things like that can make a big difference. So that's something practical that's kind of just like more recent in my life. Yeah, I'm just thinking other
Really good. Well, can
healing
I jump
thing.
in there for a second? I was just
Yeah.
thinking how useful that tip you just said is, and just wanted to add my take on it. So often for me, when I was going through like really tough, broken parts of my life, when I was really struggling, I often found that I would just like get stuck in my head or I would like hyper focus on my emotions. And like you just described, it was just really freeing to kind of get out of my mind and like into my body. And so, like you said, like working out, doing, just enjoying like a beautiful sunset, going on a walk, swimming, like whatever form that took, just some sort of like movement and kind of some sort of sensory experience, healthy sensory experience. Like, yeah, that was healing. That was helpful. It helped calm me down, especially if I was anxious, or gave me a little bit of life if I was like down and depressed. So yeah, all of that I think is super, super useful and very practical for someone who maybe is in the midst of it right now.
Yeah, yeah. And then a different avenue that's been, I think, just really beautiful for me personally. I know that not everybody has more of an artistic bend, but for me,
Yeah.
like I'm not a great painter, but like what does come natural to me is writing. So I really just enjoy writing, just about my feelings. And that's something that I was encouraged to do kind of starting in high school. But just, writing, journaling has been really, really powerful for me. And then I think just kind of the acts of little beautiful things. So I'm a drummer and I can't actually like write songs because I don't understand melody, but I've learned enough to be able to, write these little attempts at songs. And it's just so joy filling and life bringing for me to be able to take this thing that I feel and, communicate it and put it into these melody and these lyrics. And then to be able to, hopefully one day share that with other people. And again, like full transparency, this is not on Spotify. I am not good at this. This is just something that I do purely because I love it. And so, whatever your thing is, like, don't assume that you have to be a master at any artistic endeavor for it to have value in your life. Like, art just has this beautiful healing capacity that's available to all people. Everybody has a voice. Everybody can sing, even if it's out of tune. Most people, I should say that caveat, most people. But, like we all have opportunities to just really explore those little artistic, creative things. So, whatever that is for you, like I would just encourage you to throw yourself into that with the confidence of a little kid, just, so excited to try something. Because it's kind of like the back door to healing, in the same way I was talking about how drumming was just super good for me. I think there's something really special about art and creativity and just those things that bring us pleasure that there's no expectations tied to, that can just really be a beautiful avenue to kind of take you out of all the negative and just kind of give you this back door into, yeah, just a positive frame of mind.
So good. And it's so interesting. What I've learned from like listening to trauma therapists and even interviewing someone here is being artistic accesses the part of your brain where trauma is typically stored. It's like the emotional part of your brain. So you have one brain theory, this is just one, is like you divide your brain into two. There's like the logical part, which is more associated with like math, solving problems, logic, things like that. Then there's the emotional side of your brain, which is more associated with, yeah, just being artistic, like kind of feeling feelings and then, responding in like emergency situations. It's not as much thoughtful, so to say, but just more reactive. And when we're artistic, it actually accesses that part of our brain. And what can often happen with trauma is that when we go through something traumatic, that emotional part of our brain takes over because we get in this like fight or flight mode. And so that part of the brain actually like commandeers everything else. And so it can be really difficult, like you described earlier in your story, it can be really difficult to put into words those experiences that we've been through, the struggles that we're having, because they're so deeply like ingrained in that emotional side of the brain. And so one of the ways that therapists like activate that or access that is through art. And so, like you said, super, super helpful in healing. And you don't necessarily need a therapist to like do art, but they use it in their therapy to help kind of bring healing into one thing too about that I've learned, and I mentioned this in other episodes, but that emotional side of your brain doesn't have a sense of time. And so, like we were saying before, if you haven't kind of brought closure to some trauma from your past, some really difficult experience that you had that really left an impact on you and you weren't able to really cope with well, then yeah, it can like still be affecting you to this day, to where you can be walking around like you're a 25, 30-year-old man, but if it's triggered in the right way, you can then act like a 10-year-old. And this happens a lot, right? And so one of the ways to heal that is to, kind of access that part of your brain and be able to tell, that younger you, hey, this is over. It's in the past. We're like a better, stronger person now to handle it. Like that was a really difficult thing to go through, not minimizing it at all, but now we can like move on with our life. Doesn't need to control us. So anyway, not to go on that too much of a tangent there, but I thought it's really powerful. And I think just validates the whole thing of like, yeah, art is a good thing. And whatever form that takes for you, I think it can be really, really healing.
Yeah. And I think one last thing that I would be remiss if I didn't share. I remember after I'd had that sixth grade moment, I was going on like this kind of church retreat. And, I just always felt like at school, I was made fun of or put down and just, kids in the neighborhood, like whatever. There was never really a space where I knew that I could fully be myself and just be accepted. And for me, I found that space for the first time at the youth group at our church. And I just remember feeling love for who I was and that, I could really be accepted as I am. And again, I know that there's many people from many different faith and belief backgrounds. And so, whatever that looks like for you, I think that's the thing that's made the biggest difference for me was just having, a couple older adults outside my immediate family really believe in me and pour into me, and really having a community of people, just a safe space where I could just belong and just be totally weird and totally, goofy and just be accepted and be celebrated for that. And so I just realized, I was like, wow, I've spent this whole time talking about everything else except, probably the thing that has had the biggest impact. And, that could be hard to find, like, especially if you're kind of out of the school, college environment, like that's difficult to find. But man, it is worth fighting for, and it is worth putting yourself out there to find those spaces because, at the end of the day, we're social beings, social creatures that are sometimes rational. We're not rational creatures that are sometimes social. So yeah, we really do need other people. And I hope that if you don't have people like that, that you can find them. And, I think there's a lot of people who would want to connect with you like that.
Really good stuff. I love how practical all of your advice has been. You've done this throughout the conversation, but if you would kind of quickly summarize, how's your life different now? Like you've gone through this healing process, this transformation. Obviously, we're always still a work in progress. It's not something that's necessarily one and done. And like you said before, healing isn't linear. It kind of, jumps around. It's personal. It's the way we talk about it. So I'm just curious, contrast for us quickly how life is now compared to how it was.
Man, you get me excited, Joey. This is good stuff, man. So, I mean, honestly, like full transparency, I was crying in my car yesterday. Like the ups and the downs are still there. But man, I genuinely, for all the struggle and all the pain and the deep grief that I feel like I've walked through, I feel like through strength outside of my own, that I have really come to experience a hope that is deep and that's lasting. And I really, believe that God wants that for everybody and that that's available to everybody. And I just, whether you believe in that or not, like God loves you. He does have a plan for your life. He's always been there for you. He always will be there for you. And I just really, if you don't believe that right now for yourself, just know that I'm believing that for you. And yeah, man, like it's funny because if 27-year-old me sat down with 8-year-old me, 10, 15, 20-year-old me and said there's hope, I might laugh in his face and try to fight him, you know? But truly, just in the most compassionate way I can say it, dude, there is hope. In your darkest night, there is hope. In the midst and the thickness of the struggle, you might not be able to see that, but I promise you that there is a morning. The morning does come. And I just want you to hold on to that, man. Like whoever's listening to this, like just get some fire in your chest and just like know that, it's not all ever going to be okay, but like it's meaningful and there is purpose. And so I just hope that you feel empowered that no matter who you are, no matter where you've come from, no matter what your circumstances are, like there is a plan for your life and it is meaningful and it is purposeful. You're loved and you're valuable and you're needed.
So good, man. Thank you for all that. And if someone wanted to get in touch with you or maybe even check out some of your music, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah. So I haven't released any of my music, but I'm happy to like share with you my little garage band demos, which is just me and an acoustic guitar, like doing a little bit. But yeah, I'm definitely happy to like reach out to people via email. We can just connect there and then can go from there. And I think you'll have that available for people too.
Yeah, thank you. We'll throw that in the show notes. And no, I'm excited to whenever you do put stuff on Spotify, we'll be ready to listen. So it's awesome, man. Thank you so much. And man, what you just said was like kind of the last word, but I just want to throw it back to you maybe one more time and just see if there's any final pieces of encouragement or advice that you would give to the younger you listening right now. Like to close this out, what would you say? And again, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute joy just to be able to share, the real depths of the hardness, to be able to share the real heights of the hope. What I would say to my younger self, oh man, that's a deep one. I feel like for me personally, it's hard not to give a faith-based answer for this one. So I think for me, it would just be that God's promises are true. And I think at the end of the day, it's hard to believe sometimes that he is always there for us and that he loves us and he has a plan. But enduringly through the worst, the best, and the most like crazy moments of my life, I have really witnessed those to be true. And I'm grateful that I get to testify of that today.
If you'd like to share your story with us like Ethan did, we'd love to hear it. You can do that in 3 simple steps. But first, some of the benefits of sharing your story. Reflecting on your story and sharing your story with someone who can receive it with empathy is actually healing on a neurobiological level. It makes your brain healthier, according to neurobiologists. Writing your story is also healing. Studies have shown that people who write about emotionally significant events in their lives, they're healthier, they're happier, they're less depressed, less anxious, and so on. And finally, it can just be super helpful for someone to read your story who's maybe a few steps behind you. They're going through things that you went through. They can get a lot of encouragement and advice by reading your story. And so if you want to share your story, just go to restoredministry.com/story. On that page, you'll tell your story following the form. It's just a short version of your story, and then we'll turn that into an anonymous blog article. Again, you can share your story now at restoredministry.com/story, or just click on the link in the show notes. If you come from a divorced or broken family, or maybe you know someone who does, we offer more resources than just this podcast. Those resources include a book, free video courses, speaking engagements, a free assessment, online community, and so much more. All of our resources are designed to help you heal from the trauma you've endured and build virtue so you can break that cycle and build a better life. And so if you want to view those resources for yourself or someone you know, you can go to restoredministry.com/resources or just click on the link in the show notes. That wraps up this episode. If you know someone who's struggling because of their parents' divorce or broken family, feel free to share this podcast with them. Honestly, feel free to take 30 seconds now to just text them and just say, hey, heard this episode, thought of you, thought it might be helpful. I promise you, as someone who comes from a broken family, if someone would have done that to me, it would have been super, super helpful. In closing, always remember you're not alone. We're here to help you feel whole again and break the cycle of dysfunction and divorce in your own life. And keep in mind the words of C.S. Lewis, who said, you can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending.